so much for welcoming me to this um, gathering. This is, I think, my fourth, everyone but the first one I've attended so far. For those of you who haven't met me, I'm Dave Martel, and I'm the Canadian rep on the Regional Council. I'm also the president of the Canadian Society of Addiction Medicine. We're fortunate in Canada that we have things quite simple. We have one large country and we have one national society. And that takes away from how much I'm able to convey about partners and partner organizations and introducing people and activities. And geographically, we're huge, but from a population standpoint, we're reasonably small at about 40 million people. There is a move in our country to form a society of addiction psychiatrists. I don't believe it has formed yet. So perhaps at the next meeting, I'll be able to introduce someone else and have an ambassador to present with me. You can go to the next slide, Hamid. Our one big feature each year is our national conference, and we've done quite well to attract people to it every year. This coming year, it's in Hamilton. Last year, it was in Victoria, British Columbia, and was wildly successful. Our attendees and profiles seem to grow each year. And I welcome everyone to come to Hamilton in mid-November. I think part of us doing this is finding ways to collaborate in person now that the pandemic has quieted down a fair bit and we can travel more, although it's becoming prohibitively expensive. You may have noticed, you can go to the next slide, Hamid. What I plan to do in place of talking about all of the different things that have been done, I'll give a description at the end, is going through some index policy pieces that have come out in Canada that the Canadian Society is looking at, endorsing, and doing work in. The first of them is we had an index paper that came out in the Canadian Medical Association Journal that had to do with further guidance on high-risk drinking. And one of the many recommendations ended up being quite contentious. I'm sure some of you have seen it. It had to do with serotonergic drugs prescribed for in the setting of people with severe alcohol use disorder. No teasers. There will be more publications coming out in the future about some of the backlash from that publication. But I can give references for those who are interested. You can go to the next slide, please. Further to the work that was done more than a year ago now on alcohol guidance, we have some other publications that have come out from the Canadian Centre on Substance Use and Addiction that accompany that document. This one was one that we helped work on. That was an accompanying pamphlet to guide conversations about drinking and risk reduction to be used on the front line. It's a very user-friendly pamphlet to use in the setting of talking about alcohol and alcohol-related harms. You can go to the next slide, Hamid. One of the biggest conversations that takes place in Canada now for the past many years has to do with the drug toxicity crisis and overdose deaths in the context of the poisoning of the illicit drug supply. We've had a few index studies come out looking at early data related to some of the interventions that are being done in this setting. And so far, really big investments have been made in several areas of the country, and early data seems to show some impacts of some of them, but we still haven't made much of a dent in overdose deaths over time. In fact, they seem to be increasing regardless of policy decisions. Go to the next slide, please. Another one that I was, sorry, this is flipped ahead. This is the in reference to drug decriminalization that's now more than 6 months in, I think almost a year in, where the decriminalization of all drug use took place as a policy piece in one of the provinces in Canada. And data is starting to come out on the impacts of that policy decision, although it's still early days as well. This is an experiment that Canada is dipping their toe in to try to see as a nation whether or not it can become national policy. And I don't think we have enough data really to make big determinations yet. And our national government is not anywhere near ready to make any kind of decision like that. I know people are quite interested in the experiment that's taking place. Go to the next slide, please. One of the big pieces of legislation that we decided not to embark on this year, that was due to come out in a few weeks, had to do with medical assistance in dying in the context of mental disorders being the sole underlying medical condition. I presented at the last CSAM conference on policy work that had been done in preparation to this. The government decided to put it on hold again for 3 more years. And we're not sure if it will be implemented, but there are big implications for people with, particularly vulnerable people with substance use disorders that are a large cohort of people who we expect to perhaps make these requests in a play to try to get resources into mental health settings. Go to the next slide, please. Our society has now been quite involved with the topic of involuntary treatment for several years, and we've had an index publication come out in our own journal on involuntary treatment. A further review is underway, a follow-up to this piece, and we're starting to, I think, get some support for looking at policy decisions in specific provinces in Canada that speak to involuntary treatment. And I think it is having an effect on influencing some policy, which is strange because the review itself basically says that there isn't really any evidence one way or the other to do anything, and that the quality of the research is very poor. So making policy decisions on the basis of an absence of evidence is kind of counter to what we should be doing, in my opinion. You can go to the next slide, Hamid. Another big index study that came out was a follow-up to our low-risk cannabis use guidelines that came out in 2017, with a further focus on the specific harm of psychosis in the setting of cannabis use. The initial study was led by Benedict Fisher out of the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, this follow-up piece, as well as by his team, along with some researchers who work in my area, Phil Thibault being the main one. You can go to the next slide, Hamid. We've also done some supporting work in the realm of alcohol policy. Specific ones have to do with minimum unit pricing. Here it's from the Center for Substance Use and Addiction, the Canadian Center for Substance Use and Addiction. They refer to it as social reference pricing, but the policy is minimum unit pricing per unit of alcohol. And this is something that we're trying to support nationally that we're not getting a lot of political traction on, but that will have an impact and has had an impact in other places, particularly in Scotland. You can go to the next slide, Hamid. And in addition to that, we're still trying to make headway on some national guidelines on alcohol labeling. We've done incredibly well in this country in the preparation to decriminalize cannabis with the labeling, but we still fall far short in the way that promotion of alcoholic products takes place. You can see in this picture the comparison of what it looks like to buy cannabis in a container versus what looks to be soda for children. That's in fact 7% alcohol. You can go to the next slide, Hamid. And this is just another set of pictures showing the variations in alcohol labeling in different areas of the country. We're not fortunate in Canada in that a lot of these policies are regional because of the way the governments are set up. Healthcare, food labeling decisions take place on provincial levels. National policies are much harder to implement. So there's always a wide variation from one part of the country to the next. You can go to the next slide. Again, I'll plug our conference in Hamilton. For those of you who want to submit an abstract to join us, the abstract submission portal will be open within the next 2 weeks. Our society has also done a lot of work to try to convene different groups, including the 11 fellowship programs we have in Canada. And we have a student interest group that's trying to get off the ground. We have a lot of collaborations that are taking place with the different societies in Canada, different other nonprofits that have to do with addiction medicine. We're collaborating with ISAM on 2 fronts, trying to develop a fundamentals program, and we hope to further that in the coming months. And the telemedicine working group with Dr. Baldacchino and his compatriot, Joe Tay. Um, I'll leave it at that. I'm curious to see what people make of these different areas, looking for avenues for collaboration with other societies around the world. Thank you, Ahmed.